So now that you have had a chance to look at the standards, let's see what they could look like in action. We're going to take a look at what it could look like in your classroom, in your English language arts classroom. So these examples are going to be K-12, so sometimes they might need some modification in order for them to work for your classroom, or sometimes it's just a general idea and you would know how you would use it best in your classroom. So you're going to get this slide deck. It will be in your Canvas course. Just a reminder that you do have all of the access to the information from the state ed website. I'm just putting it in this slide deck as well, so you have it. So let's dive into impacts of computing. These are the parts we've already gone over, what it means for impacts of computing and what the sub-concepts are. I like, because we're talking about English, to think about the vocabulary that we might need to know. So again, this could be something you build K-12. But as far as nouns, we're looking at computing technologies, tasks, how we live and work, our world and global society, trade-offs, equity, access, and influence. And then for verbs, we're really looking at identify, analyze, discuss, describe, express, compare and contrast, and evaluate. So if you think of them in regards to your Bloom's taxonomy, at the K1 and the lower grades, you're really looking at the lower end of Bloom's. And then as you get into the older grades, you're really starting to think about those higher order thinking skills. So what could you do with impacts of computing? You can use the accessibility tools that you have on your devices. You can build compare and contrast activities, research projects where you can use internet or topics where ethics or new technology, emerging technologies is a focus. You could write persuasive essays about privacy and ethics and social media and anything along those lines. You could do tracking activities. It's a great tie-in with your profession or with your PE teachers to think about how they're using different wearables and then comparing them to, maybe how we used to track how we exercised or something along those lines. Pros and cons activities, creating book reviews about technology, examining the websites for the accessibility features, and then having that conversation of, would this site work for somebody who has a visual need or has a hearing need, and so on. You can absolutely have posters that are created. This is your offline where you can create actual posters to hang in hallways, or you can create digital posters if you prefer on whatever programs you use. You can research computer scientists and really take a look at what those careers do and look at the ones that have made an impact on the way we function. You can definitely interview people in computer science fields, and you definitely can do some activities around fake news. You're also going to get on these pages a Padlet of some resources for you. These are just ideas from people around the state that have already taken courses like this one and thought of some resources you can have. So you can take a peek at those. Then we're going to move on to computational thinking. Again, just to remind you what it's all about. We're talking about algorithms, programs, simulation, data, problem solving, and creating solutions. On the right, you'll see those sub-concept areas that we covered in the other videos. As far as our nouns and verbs here, nouns are patterns, prediction, data, problems, algorithms, computational process, models, computational artifacts, visualizations, and programs. I'd even add in there sequencing. I think that's something when you're talking about computational thinking that, even though it's not on the glossary from the state, I do think it's something we need to spend time on to make sure our students understand what that means. And then as far as verbs, we're going to start with identify, and we're going to get right up into that evaluate, refine, and define or design. Those are your high impact, high end of Bloom's as you go down the spectrum. So for computational thinking, you can do tangrams and have students write stories about them. You can examine patterns in nature or patterns in poetry or patterns in the way stories are done. You can build recipes. You can do coding. I taught sixth grade ELA, and I definitely use coding quite often in my classroom because there's a lot of correlation between the writing process and the coding process. You can use word prediction software to have your students do poetry or write stories based on the computer finishing their sentences. You can use surveys and then graph and chart that information into different activities and have your students write essays about what they discovered or create infographics along the lines with that data. You do plot twist activities where you explore what would happen if you changed one aspect of a common story. So Take Cinderella, for example. What would happen if that shoe hadn't been left on the stairs as she was running away from the ball? Just like if you change one line of code, it could change the way the program is going to run. You could bring your students to the library or look at your own library in the classroom and talk about the best ways to sort the books based on interests and so on. And definitely, this is one where you can create how to activities. The next one is networks and systems design. Again, we're talking about your input and output, your hardware and software, and the functioning of your computer systems. Your sub-concepts are also, we discussed in the last video. As far as your high impact vocabulary for the networks and system standards, we're talking about inputs and outputs, hardware and software, computer program, digital storage, solution and strategies, network and the internet, rules, protocols, and emerging technologies. You'll notice that the verbs start at that identify and describe, but they really get up to design, communicate, and summarize. So again, as you're going up blooms, it's moving into those higher and high order thinking skills. As far as sample activities, you could have your student do labeling activities. If you bring in a robot, they could label the parts of that robot. Explain the difference between input and output. So for your littles, maybe you're playing a telephone game. For your older students, maybe you're having them think about how they're going to write a story based on different parts. Maybe they're using spin the wheel to have different things happen in their story. Explore inventions, have them design something like an accessible game controller. Student help desks are great here. Cryptography and breakout edu. You could research how the tech works and then have the students design something along those lines. They can learn a language that can tie very nicely into networks and systems. They can learn Morse code or sign language. You can even have your students create tech guidebooks for other grade levels. In cybersecurity, we're talking about our actions and identifying our risks, safeguards, and our response to potential attacks. Here we're talking about our nouns and verbs being private and public information, digital resources, security, safeguards, code or cryptographic methods, suspicious activities and breaches. Again, we're going from identify, compare, and contrast all the way up to model, evaluate, and recommend. Sample activities could be sorting activities, personal versus private, creating posters about our internet risks, discussing personally identifiable information, research hacking as both a negative and research ethical hacking as a possible career. Learn about phishing and clickbait, discuss password sharing, create safe online behavior guides. Again, using those ciphers and breakouts, you can research codes through history. You can even talk about hieroglyphics to now being going back to emojis and how our codes have changed or the way we write and communicate has changed. We could talk about our online safety. We can review emails. I've seen schools host senior nights where they teach password safety to senior citizens or bring in emerging technologies for seniors to check out. And you could research data breaches and what has happened based on that. Ask your students, has your phone ever been hacked? Have you ever had any of your data stolen? What happened? How did you get it back? And then finally, you have digital literacy. Here we're talking again about how we leverage that computer technology to be able to create, share, modify, interact, collaborate, all the things we want to be doing online. So really, this is about how we use technology and how we protect ourselves and showcase ourselves in the best light. As far as our high impact vocabulary, we're talking about keyboard, digital tools, search tools, digital artifacts, emerging technologies comes up again, digital citizenship, and online behaviors. I would also add in here upstander and bystander. While they're not in the standards, these are really important terms for our students to understand what it means to be a bystander versus what it means to be an upstander. For verbs, I would also recommend, the ones that are in the standards are identify, type, conduct, and they go all the way up to refine, compare, transfer, evaluate, and manage. For digital literacy, you can have students practice their spelling on their keyboard. They can create digital presentations on anything you're doing in the classroom. They can collaborate on an online document, whether you're using Kami or Google Docs or Office 365, doesn't matter. The idea is that they're collaborating. You can have your students narrate a video or create videos about different items. They could write blogs or do podcasts. You can explore the privacy policies on the tools that they use in school versus the tools they use in their personal use. You can review online resources for validity and determine what they need for research. Explore the Wayback Machine to be able to see that all information ever on the internet is permanent. And you can have your students create infographics. So, anytime you're having students touch technology, you're hitting some of these standards. You just might need to make it a little more explicit as you're going through. What I'm leaving you with is a document of just some resources. So this is going to take you out to a Wakelet collection that's going to have 118, probably more by the time you're looking at this. But there'll be all sorts of resources for you. They are not in any age order because sometimes things can be used above and beyond the grade levels, and you might need different things for different resources or for different lessons. So all the information is here. As you scroll through, you'll be able to see different ideas and different resources to use in your classroom. For example, this is a great one I found on Twitter that I thought was fabulous. It lists all of the Pixar shorts that are available with links out to them, and then it talks about your teaching practice with the shorts. So these are things you're always going to be doing in English anyway, but here we can bring in that digital literacy, and we can extend it out from talking about what's the impact of having these videos, or how are they designed, how are they created, what when we're watching a video, what information are we giving away, how does predictive software work on Netflix or Disney Plus, whatever you're doing there. So there's lots of ways you can use all of these resources. So this is for you as a way to kind of explore different ways that these standards can look in your classroom.